In a CSS Flexbox layout, Flex Wrap is used to automatically put elements onto another line when the window gets smaller. It was a great solution to achieve responsiveness fast, but recently I started to look out for better alternatives of Flex Wrap because it has its issues. First of all, the default settings in a Flexbox layout are very counterintuitive. Why does it place the elements down here? We have to address other Flexbox properties to make it behave normally. Also, I personally don't like what it does on a tablet screen with a 3-card layout. Also, when used on a larger scale with a lot of content, you cannot address the individual lines of your layout. In these cases, it's always recommended to use a grid layout instead of Flex Wrap. And lastly, on mobile screens, having a 5-card layout put vertically using Flex Wrap will result in endless scrolling just to get past this website section. No user wants to scroll this many times. So, after having run into all of these problems, I came up with 3 solutions that work way better than Flex Wrap, and I'm going to explain all of them in this video. My name is Fabian and this is Coding to Go, the channel where you learn the most relevant coding concepts in just a few minutes. The first solution is meant for the very common 3-card layout. Here I said before that I don't like the tablet version of it where one card is wrapped to the next line. Now you can go many different ways to make it look better. If you want to stay with Flex Wrap, then I recommend to combine it with Flex Grow on the cards. That way one of the cards will grow bigger and the edges align perfectly. But keep in mind that this might influence the visual hierarchy of the 3 elements. Now the bigger card seems more important than the others. So the simplest solution to make a 3-card layout responsive would be to use a media query. Find out when exactly the layout will break and use that breakpoint in the media query. Here you simply change the flex direction of the layout from row to column. Now the cards are going to be aligned vertically, without that one weird wrapping in between. That is the first and simplest solution to avoid Flex Wrap. But now let's continue with the second solution I found, which works wonders if you have to handle a lot of content, meaning more than just 3 cards. You see, the problem I want to solve here is the amount of scrolling that a mobile user has to go through when having multiple cards stacked vertically. So one solution I like to go for is using more horizontal space instead of vertical. Take Netflix for example. Here the cards are listed next to each other. And if I'm not interested in the entire category of movies, then I can simply skip this section without having to scroll through every movie. So what is the Netflix solution for this? Horizontally scrollable containers. This can be done with both Grid and Flexbox. Simply put the cards next to each other and apply an overflow X of scroll on the parent. This way we get a scroll bar to reach the cards that are out of screen. On touch devices we can simply swipe. To make the scrolling smoother, we can use the scroll snap type property and set this to X mandatory. Then we'll define the snapping point on the flex items. Use the scroll snap align property and set this to start. This ensures that the left edge of the card is going to be the snapping point. Now the scrolling experience is much smoother, because now the scrolling cannot stop between 2 cards. Instead of stopping weirdly between 2 cards, it will always snap perfectly to one single card. And if you're not a fan of the scroll bars, then simply hide them with CSS. Instead, we can add arrow buttons on each side. And with the help of some JavaScript code, we can now interact with the swiper to scroll on click. This is a great alternative for Flex Wrap in situations where the individual card is not as important, but rather the entire group of cards. And only if the user wants to read more about this section, then he can interact with the swiper. And if he does not care about this entire section, he can easily skip this area by just scrolling one time. If you were to use Flex Wrap in this situation, then each section would take up much more space, especially on mobile devices. The next solution that I use instead of Flex Wrap is especially useful for large-scale layouts, where you have to handle multiple cards, maybe YouTube thumbnails or blog posts. Naturally, you might use Flex Wrap because it's so easy. The cards wrap to the next line automatically. But here's the problem. You see, right about at this screen size, we have some free space available. Not enough space for an entire card, but we could make every card just a bit bigger. So in Flexbox you might use Flex Grow for that. Now the cards can grow. And if you use the aspect ratio property, you can make the height adjust automatically when the width changes. And that's cool. But if we look at the last row of cards, then you might see the problem. When there are fewer cards on one line, then the flex growing will cause an inconsistent sizing of the elements. These cards are bigger and they don't align well with the other cards. So instead, for this type of layout, I recommend to use a CSS grid layout. Maybe there is a Flexbox solution to solve this right now, but it is a lot easier to use a grid layout. I like to follow a simple layouting rule, which is, if it looks like a grid, then use CSS grid. That's what it was meant for, and it will give you more control over everything. So the grid solution obviously requires display grid. Use grid template columns to define the amount and size of our columns. For that I use the repeat method, which takes 2 parameters. First, the amount of columns, and secondly, the size of the columns. I want the amount of columns to vary depending on how many can fit. So I don't provide an exact number and instead just say auto fit. That way we let the browser decide how many columns can fit automatically. The second parameter defines how big each column should be. Here I also don't provide a fixed value, but instead a size range using the min-max function. The minimum value is 300 pixels and the maximum value is 1 fraction. And having applied this size range will work exactly like FlexGrow, but now in CSS Grid. We can see its effect if I resize the window in the browser. And the autofit will work like FlexWrap, but now in CSS Grid. So with just this line of code, we get something like FlexWrap, but only in CSS Grid, which is much more controllable. Because now we have control over the individual columns and rows of this layout. We can make one row bigger if we want, or make one card span over multiple columns. This can lead to some very interesting layouts. Now obviously I don't want to hate too much on FlexWrap. It is not a bad practice. You can still use it because it is still a very useful property to get responsiveness fast and easy. But sometimes it is worth asking yourself if there isn't a better way to do this. And oftentimes the answer is CSS Grid. If you didn't fully understand everything about grid wrapping, then watch my entire video on that right here. My name is Fabian and this was Coding to Go. I will see you in the next video.